And we're live.
All right, so yeah, welcome to the presentation on Redux and kind of how we're using it in the mobile app and how we're hoping to use it in the web app fairly soon. I'm Harrison, one of the devs at Mattermost. And all right, yeah, let's get started. So, all right, what is Redux for for people that, this is a lot for people who aren't particularly familiar with React. Because in React, like for a while, the big thing was Flux and everything had to be Flux. Basically, they're both ways to kind of like have the application state, and it defines how you update that state and then how kind of the view is updated to reflect the changes. They're both one way for kind of to make sure that it's all predictable how that works. Usually there's some sort of like action that happens. That action will change the state or it'll change a store, and then the store will then update the views to display those changes. So the three kind of main things, there's kind of three main principles for Redux in particular. I'll go into detail on those in a second, but it's that there's a single source of truth in that there's a single store. If you have experience with Flux, that's kind of a key difference in that Flux has different stores for kind of different types of data, whereas Redux is just a single store. It's immutable, and that's kind of a given feature. That gives some really good benefits actually, especially with the fact that there's a single store. And then all the state transitions are pure, which means that there's no side effects. Like given a certain action, the state that results from that will always be exactly the same. So yeah, single source of truth. So to the right is kind of it's a smaller version of the store from the mobile app. It's just represented as a JSON object there, but it's usually just some sort of Java script object broken into like sections for all the different things. So normally where with Flux you'd have multiple stores, in this is just kind of sections of the store itself. So yeah, all your data is in a single place. There's only one thing to listen to, so you're not having to attach listeners to like 8 different places to make sure everything's in sync. So the next kind of principle is immutability. The state's never mutated ever. In fact, in the mobile app right now, we have it if you're in developer mode. If you try to mutate the state, it will throw an exception. That's disabled in the actual production build, but that's an efficiency thing. So yeah, whenever you change something in the state, like say for example, this is kind of roughly the same data, just in a tree. If you're wanting to change the username of the one user, it will mutate all the nodes kind of going up the tree. But then anything outside of the tree will not change, which is kind of nice. So if you're trying to check, like, say you have something that's displaying a profile picture or whatever for user 1235. If user 1234 changes, then user 1235, it will not have changed. So you can just use like the triple equals for equality checking. You don't need to do anything with checking like recursively for DB equals and all that other stuff. Even then, you can use like React Pure components, which are awesome because they do that all automatically. Then yeah, the state transitions are pure. So I'll get a bit more into this later on or after this, but basically kind of the big thing that you provide when you set up your Redux store is a reducer function. Takes in the current state, can have like a default value there, and an action, which is just an object which tells it what to do. And from that, it'll either, if it has nothing to do with that action, it'll just return the exact same state. So kind of going back to the immutability, it won't change those values that haven't changed. And if it has to do something, then it'll update the state in whatever way. In this case, it's just changing this state to whatever the value that's passed in. And yeah, so those are awesome because you can, like, since it's pure, if you have the same state and the same action, it will always have the same output. So testing's super easy. Like here, this is just testing the reducer function itself. It doesn't even need the Redux store. Or actually, I kind of goofed. It shouldn't have involved the Redux store, but I included there. But yeah, testing is ridiculously easy because you can just do that one or call the one function and check the output, and it'll always be the same. So here's kind of a diagram of the flow of a Redux app. It's pretty similar to Flux, again, if you have experience with that, because I think Redux is technically a Flux implementation or a subset or something. So how it works is you have your state. Your state gets displayed by the view, and then say the user interacts with the view, it will call an action creator that will return an action object. That's usually it. For the most part, it's just a plain JavaScript object with a type field, kind of like here, and some other data. That action will get passed into the dispatcher, which will run it through that reducer function that is user defined, which will update the state, and then after all that's done, it will alert the view that it needs to change, and the view will update to reflect that. So here we'll go to, this is the probably simplest you will see kind of a Redux store. It doesn't involve the view at all, but so here we have our reducer function. It's a counter. The state is just a number. It's nothing. It's not even like an object. We create the store by passing it into the create store function provided by Redux. That gives us a way to attach listeners through like a subscribe function, which luckily we don't need to do very much in React. There's some more stuff that makes it a lot easier. So that has the listener, and then to dispatch, you just pass in, again, an action, which is just a plain object with a type and no other data here, but it can have just any arbitrary fields. All right. So yeah, okay, this is kind of a bit of a side thing. So the reducer function that you saw here, that's just very simple if it's just for small data. There's also an ability to kind of combine reducers. Kind of show this in here because didn't have a good place for it. But it kind of just allows you to break up the store and multiple functions. Take the combine reducer function takes in an object, which is the key is just the name of where it shows up in the store. And the value would be the actual function it's called. It's like this store looks like in the comment down here. Something I've kind of wanted to show, but it's not super important. So the actual API. This API, there's that create store function I showed you, takes in the reducer, which the reducer is basically, the reducer is what you pass in, and it defines how the store all behaves. Possibly an initial state, which we don't use that a ton yet, but the cool thing is you can preload your state, so you can be like, or so you can write the state to disk at some point and pull it back out. The store that you get out of that has a get state function, which, it literally just returns that state tree. The dispatch, which you saw in use there, is demo or another example of an action. And then subscribe function, which alerts your views. There's that combine reducers I mentioned before, and then there's a bind action creators, which basically it'll hook up a function that creates that action with the dispatch that the store has, and kind of just automatically hook them up so you don't have to call it manually every time. So yeah, that's less important since you probably won't even interact with most of those if you're doing Redux stuff. Really what you care about here is there's the kind of the concept of connected components with the React Redux library. Basically set this up, you'll have a provider component somewhere like right at the top of your hierarchy. You pass in the store there. It can be a singleton if you want, or just have one per instance. It doesn't particularly matter. And then the provider will just will in the background pass down the store to all of its child components. And then they can listen to it using or by connecting to it. So connecting is, if you happen to have used our web app and have seen like the localization, there's like an inject intel function, which basically gives it access or gives the component access to a function that'll do any sort of localization you need. This is a similar idea. Basically, so the connect function, you pass in two functions that say like, first one will convert the data in the store into props for that function. The second one will take any actions and wrap them again as props for the component. And then last but not least, there's the actual component class itself. So this is kind of nice because you can write components that are completely independent of the store, and then you can just connect them in and when you need to use them, but they're still testable completely without that, and they'll just use their own props, whatever. And so, all right, an example. Yes, here's a very simple example of, actually, I'm going to go here. Okay, so yeah, here's a very basic example of a connected component. So we have our post component here. It's all complicated. It has styling. It has a bunch of stuff for rendering, all the complicated stuff. But it does not listen to the store. So if we're wanting to do probably enzyme testing at some point, which is basically just unit testing for components. And this is nice because everything we need here, we can just pass in. We don't need to worry about, or like, since it's independent, we don't need to worry about what the state of the store is. We don't need to set up a store. We don't need to mutate it and get in the right thing. We just pass in props, see what it outputs, see how it works. So yeah, we have that post component, which is off on its own. And then this one would be, the file is normally called post container for us usually. You can be even in the same file. But you see, so it exports the connected version of the component. So the two functions kind of here are the map state to props, takes in the state and whatever you call the, or whatever you called the connected component with. And it uses that to basically figure out what props it will pass into, in this case, the post. So here it gets the post from like the props of the post containers, we're calling it. The user, it actually looks into the state and pulls out what the user object is. It does some other stuff with helper or with selectors / helper functions, which I'm not going to talk a ton about, but I'll briefly mention a bit more about later. You can just think of them as helper functions, so you don't have to write out state.entities.preferences.mypreferences.blah and all this other stuff. Yep, and then mapping the dispatch to the props. This one just gets in the store.dispatch function I mentioned earlier, and it uses another helper function from Redux to map it into call. So then the post will just be able to call props.actions.go to user profile, and it'll automatically be hooked up to the store and dispatch itself nicely. All right, back to here. Okay, yeah, so that's kind of the main gist of it. If you're ever making like another component that needs to listen to the store, if it needs any new state, you'll make a reducer like I displayed earlier and kind of hook it into the list of combined reducers that we have. If you're just making a single component, you first make the completely unconnected component, in this case the post. Then you'll make a container like this code here, where it uses these functions to map the store to that post, or the state to that post. Note this is kind of a bit different than the web app because you don't need to like listen to a billion places and talk to all the different stores to get all your data and all that other stuff. It's done fairly simply, and it's all done in one place. So you can look to see like, okay, I'm listening to the users, and I'm looking for preferences, and I'm looking for the post. So we've got some other libraries that we use with Redux. I'll just talk quickly. There's kind of the concept of middleware, which is basically the ability to, when you dispatch something, it will do something with that data before you pass it to the reducer. The development tools are a type of that middleware, and it's actually really cool. I unfortunately don't have a demo of it available, other than this GIF right here, but it keeps track of every single action you pass in. It tells you like what the state looks like after that action. It gives you like a diff of what changed in that action, and even gives you the ability to rewind actions, replay actions, so you can step through the entire part of the program, or like the entire list of state changes there to see if there's anything, or to like for fixing bugs and stuff. Nope, that's not what I meant to hit. Yeah, there's the Thunk middleware, which that one's kind of neat. There's a bit of a demo down on the right-hand side. Instead of having an action creator return just a plain object, it actually allows you to return a function. So we use it all over the place for client calls because it won't fire that action immediately. So when we call like the ping server action, it will go to the server, it will usually get some data, and then it'll then dispatch either success or failed if that failed, or depending on which happened. So it allows for a lot of async stuff with that, and you can chain them together. You can use them as promises and dot then, so you can fire off one action. If that's successful, fire off another one. And it's really nice for all that stuff. And then the last one's reselect, which this one I kind of want to talk about because I find it really cool myself. It provides those selector helper functions here, like get my preferences and get theme, which at the easiest way to think of them is it just is like a helper function to get rid of all the cruft of state.entities, blah, 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 blah. But they also can be used to compute data. So in the case of this get theme one, it does... it does a lot more for, like, okay, we're looking up the preference for the theme, and we're doing team-specific themes, and if it doesn't have that, then it goes back and looks at the config for the default theme and possibly parses that out of JSON and all this other crazy stuff. And it computes those, and it does it in a way that it's memoized, so it will only compute when something in the store changes for it, which is ridiculously nice because since you only have, or since everything listens to the main store, you're going to have a lot of state updates. So if you can anything you can memoize like that will save you a ton of time. So yeah, in terms of actually how we use Redux right now, if you look at the Mattermost mobile app, we have a bit of stuff for splitting the code between two directories. That's mostly because we do hope to share a lot of that code with the web app eventually, so that will have most of that functionality work identically between the two. There'll be some stuff different for like the view, but most of it in the back end should all be hooked up the same. So you see in both those folders, there's list of action creators, list constants just has the action types because we didn't want to have to deal with typing them out constantly. Reducers, the selectors I mentioned. There's code that sets up the store in the crate in the or in the store directory. That doesn't really do anything in the production. It's just like, or it just creates the store and plugs in the reducers. In the development build, though, it hooks up all the middleware. It hooks up Thunk. It hooks up the logger, all that stuff. And then if you're wanting to look at the actual connected components, those are purely in the app directory. We may eventually get some stuff into the service, but because there's difference between React Native and regular React, then we haven't spent too much time thinking about that. So yeah, I don't know if we normally take questions, but yeah, if you enjoyed this, feel free to sign up for our pre-release server. It's the one we use every day. We've got public channels here. Developers and contributors are kind of the two main ones. And if you're interested in the mobile app, we've got a separate one for that. Most of the discussion around like how we're doing things in the app, and just post a lot of screenshots and status updates there as well.